The soft hum of machines filled the room, the steady rhythm of Evelyn Grant's heart monitor echoing against the sterile walls of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The evening light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting pale stripes across her frail frame. She had always been strong. Her co-workers used to joke that Evelyn could organize an entire law firm with a broken arm. But pneumonia had stripped that strength away. Every breath came slow and heavy, and yet her mind remained sharp. From the hallway came faint voices. At first she thought they belonged to nurses, but then a tone, familiar and clipped, cut through the quiet. "Melissa, her daughter." She sedated. Melissa said, her words barely above a whisper, "This is the perfect time. The papers are ready. Once the house is transferred, it's done." Evelyn's chest tightened, not from illness but disbelief. For a moment she thought she had misheard. The house? Their house? The little brick home in Lincoln Park where she and Harold had built a life out of long nights and patient years? A man's voice followed, low and confident. "Ryan Cooper, Melissa's husband. Janet already checked with the notary. It's all lined up. As soon as she signs, the property moves to us. The bank clears the loan next week." A brittle silence followed, broken only by the faint buzz of the fluorescent light. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, her throat dry, her pulse rising against the hospital sheets. Her daughter's heels clicked closer to the door. "Mom always wanted things fair," Melissa continued, lowering her voice. "This way. It's secure. She can't manage the house anyway. Once she's gone, it'll just complicate probate. We're helping her, really." Evelyn's hand trembled against the blanket. The way Melissa said gone, so casual, as if her death were already penciled in between errands. Ryan chuckled softly. "You're overthinking it. She'll never know. She signs. We move forward and everyone wins." Everyone. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep like ice. The woman who once rocked Melissa through fevers, who worked 2 jobs after Harold's heart attack, who paid off her daughter's first divorce debt, was now nothing but a fading signature to exploit. The voices faded down the corridor, replaced by the soft shuffle of a nurse's shoes. Nurse Aisha adjusted Evelyn's fore and smiled kindly. "You're all right, Mrs. Grant." Evelyn forced a nod, masking the storm building behind her calm eyes. "Yes," she whispered, voice rasped by infection. "Just tired." When the nurse left, she stared out the window again. The city stretched below, glittering, indifferent, alive. Somewhere out there, Melissa and Ryan probably sat in their SUV, talking numbers and deeds, believing she was too weak, too old, too unaware. But Evelyn Grant had spent 40 years as a paralegal. She knew how paper trails worked, how signatures were verified, how people lied when they thought no one was watching. A slow calm washed over her, the kind that came after shock, the kind that meant decisions were being made. She might be sick, but she wasn't blind. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, soft and forgiving. But Evelyn felt none of its warmth. Her chest still ached with every breath, and the faint scent of disinfectant lingered in the air. She had spent a sleepless night replaying the voices from the hallway, Melissa's cool tone, Ryan's laughter, the word gone hanging in her ears like a curse. Around 9, the door opened. "Mom." Melissa's voice rang too bright, too rehearsed. She swept in with a burst of perfume and a bouquet of sunflowers, the kind Evelyn used to plant in their backyard when Melissa was little. "Look what I brought." "Your favorite," Melissa said, her smile wide enough to hide the guilt Evelyn could now see clearly. Evelyn forced a faint smile, letting her eyes linger on the flowers. "You remembered," she murmured, her tone gentle, her face unreadable. "Of course I did." Melissa placed the bouquet into a plastic vase, fussing over the arrangement. "The nurse said you were doing better. I knew you'd pull through. You're too stubborn not to." She gave a nervous laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. Evelyn studied her daughter as she talked. The tailored coat, the manicured nails, the way she glanced around the room like she was checking for something. Years in the legal world had taught Evelyn to recognize microexpressions, small, fleeting tells people couldn't control. Melissa's fingers twitched whenever she lied. They were twitching now. "The doctors are optimistic," Evelyn said slowly. "They think I'll be home soon." "That's wonderful," Melissa replied too quickly. "You'll finally get some rest. Maybe we can help you handle things this time. Bills, the house paperwork, errands, everything." There it was, the test. Evelyn's lips curved, but her eyes stayed cool. "That's sweet of you," she said softly. "You've always been so practical." Melissa smiled, mistaking her mother's calm for weakness. "It's just easier if I take care of the boring stuff. You shouldn't worry about those details." The boring stuff. Evelyn nearly laughed. That boring stuff had been her life. Contracts, filings, wills, signatures. She knew what forged documents looked like, how easy it was to slip one page into a stack and bury the truth. As Melissa adjusted the vase again, Evelyn's mind drifted back through time. The long years after Harold died, the nights she worked late to pay off Melissa's student loans, the weekend she babysat Ethan and Sophie, while her daughter rebuilt her life after her first divorce. Every sacrifice had felt worth it then. Proof of love, of loyalty, of family. But sitting here now, listening to her daughter lie with ease, she realized love had become a weapon pointed back at her. "You've done enough for me, Mom," Melissa said, pulling up a chair. "It's our turn to make things easier for you." Evelyn looked at her daughter, really looked. The polished hair, the careful words, the faint impatience in her posture. She wasn't here out of love. She was here to make sure her plan stayed on course. A quiet strength steadied Evelyn's voice. "That's very kind, dear," she said. "We'll talk about it soon." Melissa leaned over, kissed her cheek, and left the room in a rush of perfume and false tenderness. The flowers remained, bright and hollow, their scent already fading. Evelyn stared at them for a long moment, her expression calm, eyes sharp with resolve. She had spent her life protecting others. Maybe it was time to protect herself. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, cutting pale stripes across the quiet hospital room. Evelyn had just finished her lunch, cold pudding and lukewarm tea, when she heard a firm knock on the door. A familiar voice followed. "Permission to enter?" Her heart lifted. "Charles," she whispered, smiling faintly. Attorney Charles Donovan stepped inside, holding a leather briefcase that had seen as many battles as he had. His silver hair was neatly combed, his dark suit pressed despite the humid Chicago air. He looked every bit the lawyer he'd been for 4 decades, measured, composed, but with eyes that still softened when they landed on her. "Well," he said, setting the briefcase down, "you don't look ready for retirement yet." Evelyn chuckled weakly. "You're late, Charles. I was expecting you yesterday. I had a hearing downtown." "Same judge who still can't tell a power of attorney from a will," he said, shaking his head. Then his tone shifted. "Melissa called me this morning. Said you were unwell." Evelyn's lips curved in a tired smile. "Unwell, yes. Unaware. No." He studied her, sensing something beneath the surface. "What's going on?" She hesitated, then gestured toward the chair beside her bed. "Close the door first." Charles did as she asked and sat down. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "I need you to verify something for me, quietly. The house, Lincoln Park. I want to make sure it's still under my name." He frowned. "You think—" "I heard Melissa and Ryan talking last night," she interrupted. "They're planning to transfer the deed. Said the papers were ready." For a long moment he didn't speak. His expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "Evelyn," Are you sure you heard right? I worked in law for 30 years, Charles. I know what I heard. He sighed, pulling out his tablet. All right, let me check the Cook County records. They've digitized most property filings now. While he typed, Evelyn watched his face. His brow furrowed, his lips thinned. She'd seen that look before, back when they handled fraud cases together. It wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. Charles, she asked quietly. He didn't look up. Give me a second. The silence stretched. Only the monitor's rhythmic beeping filled the room. Finally, he exhaled heavily and met her gaze. There's a filing from 2 weeks ago. A transfer request under your name, pending approval. Evelyn's stomach turned cold. My name. He nodded grimly. Signature looks identical to yours. Too identical. I'll need to pull the original form, but I'd bet it's forged. The Coopers listed as new co-owners. For a heartbeat, Evelyn said nothing. Then her jaw tightened. So it's true. Charles leaned forward, voice firm. Don't panic. Nothing's finalized yet. I'll start the process to freeze the transaction and contact the recorder's office. But we need to move carefully, no confrontation until I confirm everything. I understand. He studied her face, the same sharp, calm expression she'd worn back when they'd fought impossible cases together. You've always had good instincts, Evelyn. Even sick in a hospital bed, you still see things others miss. She smiled faintly. Comes with the territory. He rose, gathering his papers. I'll look deeper and keep this between us. If your instinct says something's off, Evelyn, he said, pausing at the door, it usually is. The next morning, the hospital room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. Evelyn had barely slept, her mind spinning between memories of Melissa as a child and the voice she'd heard in the hallway. Cold, calculating. When the door creaked open, she instinctively straightened her posture, smoothing the blanket over her lap. Mom. Melissa's cheerful tone filled the room again, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 unfamiliar faces followed her in, well-dressed, confident, carrying the air of people who thought of hospitals as temporary inconveniences rather than lifelines. These are Ryan's parents, Melissa said lightly, gesturing toward them. You remember Janet and Paul Cooper? Janet extended a manicured hand, her diamond bracelet catching the morning light. Oh, Mrs. Grant, it's been ages. We've heard so much about you. Her voice had the syrupy tone of someone trying too hard to sound sincere. Paul gave a firm nod. Lovely to finally visit. I told Janet we couldn't let you recover all alone. Evelyn smiled politely, the expression never touching her eyes. That's very kind of you both. They all sat, and the conversation drifted, small talk about the hospital, Melissa's new car, the weather. But soon, as Evelyn expected, it took a subtle turn. So Janet began. Crossing her legs elegantly, Ryan mentioned your home in Lincoln Park. Such a wonderful area, old architecture, great resale value. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. It's been good to me, she said, her voice calm. Oh, I bet, Janet continued, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Houses like that could fetch, what, close to $1 million these days? Maybe more. Paul chuckled. At least. The market's crazy right now. He looked around the hospital room as though appraising even this sterile space. It's good Melissa and Ryan are handling things for you. Keeps everything simple. Evelyn's smile didn't waver. Yes, simple. She stirred her tea with the hospital spoon, her hand steady. Inside, though, every word was filing itself neatly into a folder labeled evidence. Melissa jumped in, eager to steer the conversation. Mom's always been practical. We're just helping her stay organized. Janet leaned forward, her perfume sweet and suffocating. You raised such a responsible daughter, Mrs. Grant. She's looking out for your best interests." "Of course she is," Evelyn said softly. "Melissa's always known how to. Take charge." The tension shimmered in the air. An invisible wire stretched between politeness and deceit. On the surface, the room looked like a family visit. But Evelyn knew better. She saw the subtle exchanges of glances between Melissa and her in-laws, the eagerness masked as concern, the way Janet's tone tightened every time the house came up. When the visit finally ended, Janet gave Evelyn's hand a little squeeze. "You rest up, dear. Once you're back home, everything will fall into place." Evelyn nodded. "I'm sure it will." They left, chatting cheerfully down the corridor. The door closed behind them, and the room fell silent again. Evelyn exhaled slowly, the edges of her composure hardening into steel. They thought she was too weak to fight. They were wrong. By the next morning, Evelyn had regained some color in her cheeks. The antibiotics were starting to work, though she could barely taste the oatmeal on her breakfast tray. She had spent the night turning over every detail. Melissa's visit, Janet's comments about resale value, the way Paul had said it's good they're handling things for you. Each word had settled in her chest heavier than the pneumonia itself. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Morning, Evelyn," came Charles Donovan's steady voice. He closed the door behind him, his expression unusually grim. She knew instantly. "You found something." He set his briefcase on the chair and rubbed his forehead before meeting her eyes. "I wish I hadn't. You were right. There are forged documents, real estate transfer papers filed 2 weeks ago under your name." Her heart stuttered. "To whom?" "To Janet and Paul Cooper," he said quietly. "Listed as joint owners with right of survivorship. Melissa and Ryan's names don't appear, but they were the ones who initiated the filing. The notary stamp is real. The signature, your signature, isn't." Evelyn stared at him, her pulse thudding in her ears. "You're certain?" "I've been doing this long enough to recognize a mechanical copy when I see one," Charles said. "It's clean but not perfect. Whoever forged it scanned a legitimate signature from an older mortgage form." For a long moment, the only sound was the monitor's slow, steady beep. Evelyn's fingers gripped the blanket. "They didn't stop there, did they?" Charles hesitated, then opened a folder. "No, there's more. Melissa used your social security number to open 2 personal credit lines, totaling over $200,000 in debt. One through Lakeview Bank, another through an online lender. Both accounts list your home address." Evelyn felt her stomach twist. "She used my credit?" "She must have had access to your old tax forms or pay stubs," Charles said gently. "They probably thought you'd never noticed before, well, before the inevitable." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Before I died." He said nothing. Evelyn looked out the window, watching the cold Chicago wind stir the bare branches outside. Her lungs burned with every breath, but her mind felt sharper than it had in years. "What can be done?" "I've already filed a hold with the county recorder's office," Charles said. "That stops the property transfer until we prove the forgery. We'll also notify the financial institutions. It'll take time, but we can clear your name. And the people who did this." He exhaled slowly. "If we proceed formally, it's felony fraud, real estate, and financial. Melissa and Ryan could face prison time. The Coopers, too, if they signed anything knowingly." Evelyn absorbed his words in silence. The betrayal had cut so deep it no longer hurt. It simply existed, like a truth carved into bone. Charles leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I can make this right, Evelyn. But you need to focus on getting better. This won't be over in a week." Her eyes sharpened. "Charles, I'm not going anywhere until I see this through." For the first time, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "I thought you'd say that." She adjusted the blanket over her lap, straightening her posture. "Then let's do it. No more waiting." Charles nodded, closing his briefcase. As he reached the door, he looked back at her, frail in body, but alive with a fire that illness couldn't touch. "If your instinct says something's off." "Evelyn," he said softly, "it usually is." The door closed behind him, and Evelyn exhaled slowly. The beeping monitor matched the steadiness of her pulse. For the first time since her diagnosis, the sickness felt secondary. Her body was weak, but her mind was awake and ready. The next morning dawned gray over Chicago, clouds pressing low against the hospital windows. Evelyn was sitting upright when the door opened. Melissa swept in, her heels clicking against the tile, a leather folder clutched tightly in her manicured hands. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice overly bright. "You look so much better today. The doctors must be thrilled." Evelyn regarded her daughter quietly. "I'm feeling stronger," she said, her tone even. "Almost like my old self." "That's wonderful," Melissa replied, setting the folder down on the bedside tray. "Actually, that's part of why I came. There are a few things that need your signature, just routine authorizations for the bank. It'll make everything easier when you're discharged." Evelyn's gaze flicked to the papers, then back to Melissa. "Bank authorizations?" "Yes," Melissa said quickly. "Just some updates. You know how confusing these things get. Ryan and I are just trying to help." "We talked to your lawyer friend, Charles, right?" he said. Evelyn interrupted, her voice calm but sharp. "Charles never said that." Melissa froze. "What?" Evelyn folded her hands neatly in her lap. "I spoke to him yesterday. He's been very helpful, especially with the property records." The color drained from Melissa's face. "Property records?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "The ones transferring my house to Janet and Paul Cooper. The ones with my forged signature." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the machines. Melissa's breathing quickened, the confident mask slipping. "Mom, that's not what you think. There's been a misunderstanding." Evelyn tilted her head. "A misunderstanding involving $200,000 in debt under my name? That's quite a mistake to make." "Please," Melissa whispered, her voice breaking. "It's not like that. Ryan said it would just be temporary. We needed a line of credit for his business. And you weren't supposed to find out." Evelyn finished for her, eyes steady. "You really believed that, didn't you? That I'd die quietly, and the house would become your inheritance?" Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Evelyn's tone softened, but it was the softness of finality, not forgiveness. "You already did." Just then, a knock came at the door. Charles Donovan stepped inside, flanked by two men in plain suits, state investigators. Their presence filled the room with quiet authority. "Mrs. Grant," one of them said with professional courtesy, "we're here to discuss the case you filed through Mr. Donovan. We'll need to verify a few details." Evelyn nodded toward Melissa. "You can start with my daughter." Melissa turned pale. "Mom, please don't do this. We can fix it. I swear." Charles's voice was firm but measured. "Melissa, the forged documents and fraudulent accounts are already under state review. Cooperating now is the only thing that might help you." Melissa shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want to lose everything, Mom. I thought I was helping." Evelyn looked at her, a mix of sorrow and resolve in her gaze. "You were helping yourself. That's all you ever learned how to do." One of the investigators stepped forward, quietly explaining the process. No arrests yet, just formal questioning. Melissa could barely listen. She stared at the floor, trembling. Charles approached Evelyn's bed, his tone low. "You did the right thing." Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup of tea, her composure unbroken. "It's strange," she murmured. "I used to think protecting her was my purpose." Melissa lifted her tear-streaked face. "Mom, please!" Evelyn met her eyes, voice steady and quiet but filled with steel. For 45 years, I protected you, Melissa. Now I'm protecting myself. The following morning, the hospital room was bathed in a soft, golden light. The night's storm had cleared, leaving the city washed and silent beneath a pale spring sun. Evelyn sat by the window, wrapped in a light blanket, her breathing still shallow but steady. For the first time in weeks, she felt a strange stillness, not the heavy quiet of exhaustion, but the calm that comes after surviving something you weren't supposed to. A gentle knock preceded Charles Donovan's entrance. He carried his briefcase, as always, though today his step was lighter, his shoulders less burdened. "Good morning," he greeted. "I bring better news for once." Evelyn smiled faintly. That would be a change. He pulled up a chair beside her bed and opened a folder. The county recorder's office confirmed the transfer is officially canceled. "Your house is safe, fully restored to your name." Evelyn exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a moment. "And the debts?" "Voided," Charles said with quiet satisfaction. "The banks accepted our fraud claim once we provided the proof. And as of this morning, the state has filed charges for forgery and financial fraud. Melissa and Ryan will both be summoned for questioning. The Coopers, too, since they benefited from the false transfer." Evelyn nodded, absorbing every word. There was no joy in hearing her daughter's name in that context, only a steady, resigned understanding that this was how it had to be. Charles studied her carefully. "You did everything right, Evelyn. Most people in your position would have signed without question." "I've spent too many years reading the fine print," she replied softly, "and too many years trusting the wrong people." He gave a small nod, closing the folder. "It's over. You can rest now." But Evelyn wasn't thinking about rest. She gazed out the window where sunlight caught on the rooftops of Chicago, the city alive again after the rain. Down on the street, she could see people walking to work, holding coffee cups, living lives untouched by deceit or betrayal, for the first time in a long time. She didn't envy them. She simply understood them. Betrayal, she thought, wasn't what destroyed her. It was what revealed her strength. The pain of her daughter's deception had burned deep. But what hurt more was realizing how much of herself she had surrendered over the years, her boundaries, her confidence, her belief that love required sacrifice without limits. She had given all that away in the name of motherhood. Now, piece by piece, she had taken it back. Charles stood, tucking the folder into his briefcase. "I'll check in again tomorrow. Try to get some real rest this time." She smiled faintly. "I'll try. Thank you, Charles, for everything." He gave a small nod and left, closing the door softly behind him. The room fell quiet again, except for the faint hum of the monitors. Evelyn turned back to the window, where the first streaks of sunrise stretched across the skyline, painting the lake in hues of gold and rose. She whispered to herself, the words barely audible, yet certain and full of peace. Justice doesn't always shout. Her eyes softened as she watched the light spread across the city, warm and unhurried. "Sometimes," she murmured, "it just arrives quietly and on time." The weekend sun poured through the tall hospital windows, filling the room with a warm glow that softened the harsh scent of antiseptic. It was quieter than usual, no nurses bustling in and out, no lawyers or investigators. Just Evelyn, her book lying unopened on her lap, her thoughts wandering somewhere between peace and ache. She had expected solitude that day, but around 2 in the afternoon, there was a hesitant knock on the door. 2 familiar faces peeked in, Ethan and Sophie, her grandchildren. "Grandma." Sophie's voice was soft, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. Evelyn's heart tightened, but her smile came easily. "Well, look at you two. Come in before the nurses think you're lost." Ethan closed the door behind them, clutching a small paper bag from a nearby cafe. "We brought muffins." Mom said you like the blueberry ones. Evelyn nodded, taking in the careful tone of his voice, the discomfort in the way they stood. That was kind of her to remember, she said gently. How's school? They exchanged a quick glance, the kind teenagers share when the truth feels complicated. Sophie sat in the chair beside the bed, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. It's fine. Busy. Ethan remained standing, hands in his pockets. Mom said you've been confused lately, that you're tired and shouldn't worry about stuff. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Confused, huh? I suppose I am, sometimes. But only about why people think telling half-truths is the same as being kind. Sophie's eyes widened slightly. So, you're not confused? Oh, I get confused plenty, Evelyn said, her tone light. Like why people stop visiting unless they have something to gain. Or why they think doing the wrong thing becomes right if they tell themselves it's for family. Ethan frowned. Mom said you didn't want her help, that you pushed her away. Evelyn hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. Ethan, sometimes adults make choices they can't undo. But here's what I've learned. When you hurt someone, pretending it never happened doesn't make it go away. It just makes it fester. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. So she did something. Evelyn's thumb brushed over his knuckles, the gesture tender and steady. Your mother loves you both. Don't doubt that. But love doesn't excuse everything. Respect, honesty, those are the things that hold love together. When those go missing, even good people lose their way. Sophie's voice wavered. Is that what happened to Mom? Evelyn met her granddaughter's eyes, gentle but unflinching. Your mother made mistakes, but they're hers to face, not yours to carry. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The steady hum of the machines filled the silence. Then Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but clear. No matter what anyone says, you'll always be our grandma. Evelyn's chest tightened, emotion flooding her in a way she hadn't expected. She squeezed his hand, then looked at Sophie, whose eyes shimmered with quiet tears. That's all I ever needed to hear. They stayed a while longer, eating the muffins, talking about small things, college plans, Sophie's choir, Ethan's baseball team. For a brief hour, it felt like a normal visit, like the fractures in their family hadn't grown so wide. When they finally left, Sophie turned at the doorway. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. Are you? Mela, Mom. Evelyn smiled, though her eyes were wet. No, darling. Just disappointed she forgot what I taught her. But I believe people can remember who they are. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like. The door closed softly behind them. Evelyn leaned back, letting the quiet settle again. Outside, the sunlight had shifted, warm and golden against the window pane, for the first time in a long while. It didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like a beginning, fragile, distant, but real. Hope, she realized, didn't always come from the people who wronged you. Sometimes it came from the ones who still knew your name. The cab pulled up in front of the familiar brick townhouse on West Webster Avenue, just as the afternoon light began to soften. Evelyn stepped out, slowly, clutching her small overnight bag. The air carried that distinct Chicago mix of damp stone and lake breeze. Home, she thought. And yet, as soon as she opened the front door, she knew it wasn't the same. The scent of lavender and furniture polish still lingered, but something was wrong. The drawers in the hallway console stood open, paper scattered. In the living room, a few framed photographs were missing, the one from her and Harold's anniversary, and another of her holding Ethan as a baby. She moved through the house quietly, her eyes scanning the small disarray only someone familiar would have caused. Melissa had been here. Evelyn sank into her armchair, the same one where she had spent evenings reading beside Harold. The betrayal pressed down heavier than the dust in the air. When the doorbell rang, she startled, but it wasn't Melissa. It was Charles Donovan, briefcase in hand, his face lined with concern. "I figured you'd want an update in person," he said as she let him in. She gestured for him to sit. "Let me guess, more trouble?" He gave a half smile. "Actually, the opposite. The investigation is moving fast. But I don't like that she came here while you were in recovery. It's not safe, Evelyn." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "She's looking for what she's already lost." Charles studied her carefully. "You could press for a restraining order. Or, if you'd rather, sell the property, relocate somewhere quieter. The house is restored to your name. You can do whatever you wish." Evelyn looked around the room. The heavy drapes Harold had chosen. The oak floors he'd refinished himself. The faint ghost of laughter that once filled this space. "I built this home with love," she murmured. "And love is the only thing she can't steal. Maybe it's time to leave before the memories turn bitter." Charles nodded. "There's a place near Lake Michigan, a small suburb in Evanston. Peaceful, safe. I can handle the paperwork." "Do it," Evelyn said simply. "No more looking back." A week later, the moving trucks arrived. The living room was half empty, the walls pale where the photographs had hung. Evelyn stood by the window, watching as boxes were loaded, when a car pulled up fast at the curb. "Melissa!" She jumped out, eyes wild, her voice sharp with panic. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't sell this house. It's our family home." Evelyn turned, calm and composed. "It was my family home, Melissa. You made it something else." Melissa's eyes darted to the movers. "You don't understand. I was desperate. Ryan's business." "I understand perfectly," Evelyn interrupted. "You sold my trust before I sold this house." Melissa froze, tears filling her eyes. "Please, Mom, don't do this. We can fix it." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "You can fix your life. I've already fixed mine." A moving man passed by carrying the last box, labeled photographs. The house echoed empty now. The kind of silence that comes after truth has been spoken. Melissa's sobs broke the still air, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She stepped past her daughter, pausing at the doorway. "You wanted freedom from me," she said softly. "Now you have it." Outside, the late afternoon sun glimmered off the truck as the driver shut the doors. Charles waited by the curb, holding open the passenger door of his car. Evelyn climbed in without looking back. As they drove away, she watched the rows of trees blur past, the skyline fading in the distance. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest wasn't illness or sorrow, it was relief. Behind her, the house stood still and dignified, its windows reflecting the last light of day. Evelyn didn't turn around. Some things, she knew, weren't meant to be reclaimed. The first weeks in Evanston unfolded gently, like pages turning after a storm. Evelyn's new home was small, a single-story cottage with ivy curling around the porch and a narrow view of Lake Michigan glimmering in the distance. She woke each morning to the sound of gulls and the hush of waves against the shore, a rhythm that steadied her in ways medicine never could. She spent her days tending to a modest garden behind the house, the soil cool and dark between her fingers. For years, she'd watched things, people, relationships, promises, wither no matter how hard she tried to nurture them. But here, under the wide Illinois sky, she found life responding again. The tomatoes sprouted strong. The lilacs bloomed early. And she felt, for the first time in months, that she was building something meant to last. Her neighbors stopped by now and then Mrs. Jenkins from next door, who brought apple pie and gossip about everyone on the block. A retired teacher who offered to lend her books. They didn't know her story, and she preferred it that way. Here, she wasn't the woman whose daughter betrayed her. She was just Evelyn, quiet, polite, rebuilding. One late afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, a knock sounded on her door. It was Charles Donovan, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. You're hard to find when you're not surrounded by legal documents, he teased, stepping inside. Evelyn smiled. I take that as a compliment. He sat, setting his briefcase on the table. I won't stay long. Just wanted to bring you the final update. The investigation's wrapped. Her hands stilled around her teacup. Go on. Melissa admitted guilt. She agreed to restitution and community service. No prison time. The state accepted our recommendation. He hesitated, his voice softening. She's been ordered to pay back every cent under supervision. Ryan signed the same agreement. Evelyn nodded, her face unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, quietly, good. Maybe that's what justice should look like. Not punishment, but awareness. Charles studied her, admiring the quiet steel beneath her calm. You always did see the bigger picture. She gave a faint smile. I didn't lose a daughter, Charles. I found myself. He closed his briefcase, gently, as if sealing the final chapter of her ordeal. You deserve peace, Evelyn. Truly. After he left, she sat for a long time by the window, watching the lake through the open curtains. The light rippled over the water like silk, soft and forgiving. That weekend, there was another knock, this one lighter, hesitant. When she opened the door, she found Ethan and Sophie standing there, hands stuffed in their jacket pockets, eyes wide and hopeful. Mom doesn't know we're here, Ethan said quickly. We just wanted to see you. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she smiled. Then, I'm very glad you came. They spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds, eating cookies, laughing at nothing in particular. Sophie asked shyly if she could stay over some time. Ethan promised to visit before college applications took over his life. When they left, Evelyn walked them to the gate. Sophie hugged her tightly. We love you, Grandma. I know, Evelyn whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And I love you both, more than you'll ever understand. After they disappeared down the road, she lingered outside as the sky began to melt into gold and pink. The lake shimmered under the setting sun, a mirror of all she had endured and survived. She drew in a deep breath of salt and wind, the air cool and clean. At 72, Evelyn Grant hadn't just survived betrayal. She had reclaimed her life.